Karen, you're ready with Westborough TV, right? Okay, we're going to resume the meeting then. I'd like to welcome everyone back to the February 8th meeting of the Westborough Planning Board. Hopefully this edition will go a little smoother. I was in the middle of reading the legal notice. Kristen, can you share that on the screen again? All right, that's the, okay, great. All right, so I will, I guess, start from the beginning on this. Kristen, you just remove that. Okay, good. Sorry, that was on my screen. All right, the Town of Westborough Planning Board will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, the 8th of February, 2022 at 6:30 p.m. on the following articles to appear on the warrant for the March 19th, 2022 Westborough Annual Town Meeting. The Planning Board hearing will be held remotely via Zoom. Information on how to access the Zoom link can be found on the Planning Board agenda for the February 8th meeting as posted on the town website. I'm going to interject here. We were not able to do a Zoom meeting because of outside interference. So if there's any public comments, you can send an email to the email that will be on the screen. I believe Westborough TV will be displaying that. And the email is planning@town.westborough.us. Kristen, can you confirm that? I believe I got that right.
.ma.us.
planning@town.westborough.ma.us.
My mistake. I forgot the MA. All right. So if anyone from the public wishes to be heard on this, I think what we'll do, well, we'll discuss whether we want to continue these to next week in case anybody doesn't want to or wasn't able to public comment. But for now, the three articles are: one, to see if the town will vote to amend its zoning bylaws, Article 4, special regulations, by creating a new Section 5900 Industrial EIE overlay district, and by amending Article 2, district regulations, Section 2300 use regulation schedule, and Section 2620 non-residential buildings in non-residential districts, and by amending the town zoning map. The Industrial EIE overlay district is proposed to encompass properties on the west side of town along Otis Street, Secaucus Drive, Valenti Drive, and Smith Valve Parkway, as designated on the town zoning map. This area is highlighted by a series of industrial and commercial uses encompassed by the General Industrial IB District. The purpose of the IE Overlay District is to allow increased land use and intensity through increased dimensional standards, more permissive than those provided by the underlying IB District. 2, to see if the town will amend its zoning bylaws, Article 3, General Regulations, Section 3300, Sign Regulations, Subsection 3340, Off-Premises Signs, and by adding new subsections 3341 through 3347. The purpose of this amendment is to make provision for off-premises digital billboards along interstate highways that pass within the town of Westborough. 3, to see if the town will vote to amend its zoning bylaws, Article 2, District Regulations, Section 2300, Use Regulation Schedule for open uses in the M and M1 districts, or take any other action thereon. A copy of the entire proposed zoning amendments are on file with and can be viewed at the offices of the Westborough Planning Board and Westborough Town Clerk during their business hours. Any person interested or wishing to be heard on the proposed amendments should attend the public hearing indicated above. And that's published by the Westborough Planning Board and published in the Worcester Telegram and Gazette on January 24th and January 31st, 2022. All right, so I'd like to take up the sign regulations bylaw first because we have people here wishing to be heard on this, and I think we can get them out a little earlier. So Jim Robbins, if you want to introduce this and take us through, and then we'll turn to the board for questions and then allow comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So you read the article advertisement into the record. So if anyone is following at home and they're not sure which one he's referring to, if you have a copy of your agenda, it's the second zoning amendment posted in the list of 3. So it's the second one. As you know, the planning board, in cooperation with Clear Channel, brought in article at the last town meeting and removed it from the town meeting warrant prior to town meeting, requesting that the voters refer the article back to the planning board for further study. During the last 6 months, we have done significant study on off-premises signage, particularly digital billboards. We've looked at bylaws from other communities that allow off-premises signs, digital billboards. We've talked with our town council, 2 of our town councils actually. We've had our zoning review committee go through various iterations of a draft of a potential bylaw. I've circulated those drafts to the planning board. They've also been available at the planning board office for the public to view, and they're available online at the town webpage, the planning board link. What I've done this evening is prepare a presentation that outlines the specifics in the proposed bylaw. I'll go through this quickly. It is quite lengthy because it has a lot of specifics in it. We won't discuss the height and size of the signs and things like that because they're clearly posted in the bylaw. And I don't want to get caught up in the minutia, but rather talk about the purpose, the general requirements, the permitting requirements, and the benefit to the community. So Kristen, just move through the slide. Actually, can you give me host power so that I can do it?
I can stop sharing if you have the presentation on your screen in your office, if you have the PowerPoint up, and then you can share your screen. That's how you would go about doing it.
Okay, let's just proceed this way then.
Okay.
So you've given me the first slide. Thank you.
Just tell me when you want me to move forward or back.
I will. Thank you. So the purpose of the amendment is to make provisions for off-premises signs, including digital billboards, along interstate highways that pass through the town of Westborough, while regulating their location, size, and intensity. Next slide. So in specific, the purpose is to responsibly address changing technology of digital displays and the town's desire to regulate this technology, to allow new technology in designated areas through a special permit process, to regulate the quality, scale, and impact of the off-premises commercial billboards, to maintain both a competitive business market and an aesthetic attractive residential community. Next. To encourage the siting of commercial billboards and electronic digital billboards in locations that will not cause driver distraction, but can provide public service announcements in emergency situations for the safety and welfare of the general public. To preserve the residential character of the town and protect the environmental, historic, and open space resources of the community by designated defined areas of locations that minimize potential adverse impacts to the town. Next. So off-premises signs, location and regulation. Allowance of off-premises signs, including digital billboards along I-495 and Massachusetts Turnpike only. This does not include Route 9, I'll add, and it does not include any other roads or streets in town. It's only along 495 and Massachusetts Turnpike. The signs would be allowed only by special permit from the Board of Appeals, and a development agreement with the Select Board is required. Next slide. So what's applicable? Off-premises digital billboard signs may be allowed on commercial or industrial zone, specifically including exclusive industrial, the IA district, general industrial, the IB district, mixed use industrial, IC, industrial D overlay, and the highway business BA properties. Any such property shall directly abut Interstate Route 90, the Massachusetts Turnpike, or Interstate 495. Any installation of an off-premises billboard shall require a special permit from the Special Permit Granting Authority, and off-premises billboard development agreement with the Westborough Select Board. The Board of Appeals shall be the special permit granting authority. Next slide. Any off-premises digital billboard shall mean an off-premises sign utilizing digital message technology capable of changing the static image or copy of a sign electronically. A digital billboard may be internally or externally illuminated. Digital billboards shall contain static images only and shall not have animation, movement, or the appearance of or optical illusion of movement of any part of the structure. That means the sign itself can't move either. Each static message shall not include flashing or the varying of light intensity. Existing off-premises non-digital or non-electronic billboards in other districts wishing to convert to digital format shall comply with these requirements. Next. Special permit criteria. Nuisance or hazard or congestion shall not be created. No residentially zoned property or pre-existing non-conforming property or other property used for residential purposes, excluding hotels or motels, is within a 500-foot radius of the proposed location. Any sign proposed location does not adversely interfere with the use of adjacent property, including but not limited to increasing noise or vibration, casting a shadow on or causing a flicker on adjacent properties. Next. The billboard shall be in harmony with or suitable for surrounding area and would not do significant damage to the visual environment. And then we have a list of all of the factors that we consider when determining whether or not they have a negative impact on the visual environment. Number 5 says any proposed billboard shall not be permitted within 1,000 feet of another permitted off-premises digital billboard sign on the same side of the traveled way, regardless of which direction the sign is intended to face, and shall not be permitted within 1,000 feet of another permitted off-premises digital billboard sign on the opposite side of the traveled way, regardless of which direction it is intended to face. So basically, this would require a 1,000-foot separation on either side of either 495 or the Mass Pike. Next. No flashing lights shall be allowed. No sexually oriented, sexually provocative, or adult-oriented business as defined in the town zoning bylaw shall be advertised on a billboard. There shall be no advertising of marijuana-related products as defined and regulated in the town zoning bylaw. Next. The Westborough Select Board and the owner or operator of an off-premises digital billboard shall mutually agree on a schedule to which the digital billboard may advertise the town-sponsored events or other public service announcements. Next. So what is the agreement with the Select Board? Off-premises digital billboard development agreement with the Select Board. Off-premises signs shall be permitted if the board determines that the billboard sign serves to provide a public benefit to the town of Westborough. Next slide, please. The Select Board or the owner and operator of the off-premises digital billboard shall utilize the off-premises digital billboard for emergency, public service, and safety announcements, including, but not limited to, associated with law enforcement, emergency management authorities, regional emergency information important to the traveling public, including but not limited to Amber Alerts, emergency management information, or public service announcements. The Select Board shall determine any local fees or terms associated with the billboard operation. Next slide. So here you see a zoning map as it exists currently in town, and we're going to be looking at the east side or the right side of this map along the intersection of 495 and Massachusetts Turnpike. Kristen, can you just put your arrow in that intersection, that general area? Over to the right in the purple. That's it. All right there with 495 and the Mass Pike come together a little bit lower. Okay, that's good. Next slide, please. I'm going to show you the area specifically now. This was a map that was provided by Council for Clear Channel showing all of the properties that abut 495 and the Mass Pike. The Mass Pike is on the left side of your screen and runs east-west in town. The 495 is where Kristen's arrow is right now, runs north and south. So the properties highlighted in yellow are those that directly abut 495 or the Mass Pike. Those that are crosshatched in red abut residential properties. And that's important because we're requiring a 500-foot setback from any residential use and a 1,000-foot setback from any other digital sign. And we're going to show you a couple maps that have helped us to understand what our proposed setback would be if it's 1,000 feet or 1,250 or 1,500. You may recall that I sent a map to the planning board a couple weeks ago that showed what a 1,000-foot setback would look like. The board asked me to increase that setback to 1,250 feet and then to 1,500 feet to see if that changed the number of potential signs that could be along this corridor. So the next map that you're going to see, and Kristen, if you could go to that, shows a 1,250-foot setback potential sign locations. The control point is the one existing billboard that's on the lower right-hand portion of your screen. It exists on the Cumberland Farm property. Thank you. That's where it is, where Kristen's arrow is. So you'd have to maintain 1,000 feet at a minimum for another sign and a 500-foot buffer, which is the blue circle, to any residential properties. When we did this on GIS, if either of those circles either intersected with each other, we had to eliminate a location for a sign, or if the blue circle touched a residential use, we had to eliminate that location. So you can see where the residential uses are, and the blue circle is outside any of the residential properties. The properties that are highlighted with a faint yellow are those properties that directly abut 495 and the Mass Pike. So under the 1,250-foot separation scenario, you can get approximately 4 signs. Obviously, the next sign in, if somebody applies for a permit and locates a sign, would determine where future signs could go, because you'd have to draw 1,000 feet and a 500-foot buffer from that sign location before you could permit an additional sign. So this is a best case scenario under 1,250-foot separation requirement. Next slide. Same number of signs, but this is a 1,500-foot separation. So the location's changed. So the location that was previously in the lower left-hand corner was eliminated because the distance separation is increased from 1,250 to 1,500. The 500-foot residential buffer remains in the same place. It doesn't change the number of signs. It changes the location for those potential signs. Again, the control is in the lower right-hand corner. That's an existing sign on the Cumberland Farms property that faces the Massachusetts Turnpike. So these two maps were intended to give the board an idea of what a maximum amount of signs could be along 495 and the Mass Pike. I think that's my last slide. Do I have another slide there, Kristen? No, that's it. Thank you. Mark, you're on mute.
Sorry about that, guys. Jim, do you want to take us through the bylaw as it's written, or do we want to go to the board for questions?
I think you should go for questions because I covered the criteria for the special permit and I covered the criteria for the selectmen, and I don't think it would do us any good to go word for word through the bylaw. Okay.
So I guess, Jim Ball, I'll start with you. Do you have any questions, comments that you want to address?
No questions, Mark, because we've talked about it in detail and I was on the committee, so I have a pretty deep understanding. The only comment is, what we didn't show here, but we saw last week was the 1,000-foot. Of course, I think it would allow for 11 potential signs. Obviously, that's if, the first person and the next person, if someone chooses and asks for a permit in the middle, we may only have 3 signs or 2 signs, depending on where that next sign go or that first application goes. So 4 being the worst case at 1,250 is more appealing to me than potentially 11 signs at 1,000. So I would make that, I would like to make that one adjustment to 1250. I think going to 1500 is going to limit some people that would be able to do it or not. And I don't know that that's fair in that it doesn't further reduce the number of signs. So I'm inclined to go to 1250 and give a bit more flexibility. That's my only comment based on those two follow-up maps that Jim sent.
Mark, based on those maps, I also agree that I would prefer to move to 1250, just based on placement. And I think if we go to 15, we might be limiting how many possible locations. So I think we don't want to limit, but I also think we want to make sure we don't go overboard with these signs. So I think 1250 makes sense, and that's where I think we should make that change.
Tim, Kaler, do you have any comments, questions?
No questions, Mark. I support what Jim and Peter said, and supportive of the move to 1250 for the reasons indicated, and supportive of the bylaw.
Okay, and Hazel?
I am opposed to the bylaw, and I'm opposed for the following reasons. One of my concerns is a freedom of speech issue. The town attorney did make the point that even if we try to limit what is, as far as the marijuana and the
Hazel.
Right, limited, it could be challenged by the AG's office. I also wonder about things like political advertisements, various political things that could go onto the billboards. I'm just not sure whether we're not going to run across a situation where we have something on that bulletin board which really is inappropriate for our community. Secondly, this is more of a safety issue. And the effect of the placement of the bulletin boards. By the way, I just have one question I wanted to ask Jim. Isn't there a specific prohibition of having a billboard within a certain number of feet of an intersection?
That's correct. And we stayed away from the properties that directly abutted the intersection of 9 and 495 and the Pike and 495.
Okay, I just wondered about that. But I'm, for a safety issue, that I do know that the signs can only go on the west side of the highway. If you were driving north and you look at one of the signs on the left-hand side there, and it's advertising something in Westborough, which would be obviously to the one thing that would be of a benefit to our community. If you want to get off on that Route 9 exit, it's one of the most hazardous exits to get off on going north because of the entrance of the traffic going north coming from Route 9. I think that could potentially cause a safety hazard. So therefore, I think that the placement is just inappropriate for safety reasons. Secondly, if you're coming south on 495, the placement of the billboard, which would obviously be south of the Westborough exit, what benefit of that is to our community? We may talk about the fact that some of this are going to be public service announcements. That's fine, but what about advertising of any sort? So you're driving south on 495, and this billboard is south of the Westborough exit. Your next exit is Mass Pike. Therefore, there'd be no reason for someone to advertise something in Westborough because there'd be no way really to get there. So I honestly look at this as not a real benefit to the community. I think Marlborough would be delighted to put advertisements on our sign, but is that the reason we're putting the sign out there? Is it to advertise businesses in other communities? So I don't really feel it's a benefit to our community. Finally, I think that I know we're looking at the rental fee as money coming into the town, But I'd like to look at this as the whole picture of the community. When you drive up and down 495 and you go through this area, it's very bucolic. We've got trees, we've got greenery. To have a large digital billboard sign sitting next to the highway here, I think really is, I don't know. I think it's detrimental to the feeling of our community of Westborough. So I really am against this.
All right. So I'm a little torn because I agree with some of Hazel's comments. I'm not a huge fan of billboards. But I also recognize some of the benefits to the town, including the tax benefits, the development agreement that would generate additional revenue, and the public service announcements. I think the bylaw with a 1,250 foot between signs minimizes the number of signs. I think it doesn't even take into account topography on sites or wetlands. So we may see even fewer that map predicts, but I do think that 1,250 gives more landowners an opportunity to take advantage of this bylaw. As far as the freedom of speech, we heard from town council suggesting that might be struck from the bylaw. I'm all for freedom of speech, but I'm not excited about some of the potential advertising, except we already have 3 digital billboards in town that potentially could have such advertising, and several non-digital billboards. I'm not even sure how many, probably 5 to 10 non-digital billboards that to me could display that advertising without any restrictions because they pre-exist this bylaw. And if in fact they converted those billboards to digital under this bylaw, then they would be under the terms of this bylaw, would have to do a development agreement. And potentially if that section of the bylaw stands, they would not be able to display adult entertainment ads. So I like the idea of regulating. I think as much for the existing signs as for any potential new signs. I think I'd rather see digital billboards than the older style billboards. I think it's a better product. As far as, so I'm inclined to support it, but I'd like to leave the language in regarding the billboards. Regarding the ads, if it doesn't make it through the Attorney General, then we can either strike that section or bring it back without it. I think the town really needs to decide this, and I think it's a worthy bylaw to bring to the town, especially given the budget climate that we're in. And I do think every dollar matters because the budget is going to be a big issue at town meeting.
Mark, a further comment when you have a moment.
Yeah, and I don't mean to monopolize it, but Jim, you had sent out the bylaw, and I don't remember, but I thought in 3342 section D, we had added a requirement that the signs not be any larger. And I'm not sure if I'm just looking at an older version of this.
Mr. Chair, could you please have the document that we're voting on, the language projected?
Yeah, Kristen, can you put up the bylaw? So section 3342D. Okay, yeah, so I was looking at an older version. Okay, that's great. I just wanted to make sure that language is in there. All right. I'm sorry, Jim Ball, you had another comment or question?
No, Mark, I just wanted to remind the committee did do a survey where we had, my recollection is about 300 responses, and a significant majority of those responses supported billboards on Route 9 and 490. I'm sorry, not Route 9, on 495 and the Turnpike. So I don't think we should forget that. I think that people did think that the fees were valuable and the public service messages were useful. I happen to agree to that. I drive by the one on 9 all the time. I see a lot of things that remind me of things that are happening in town. I like it. It's not offensive. It's good looking. Yeah, and so I think it is important to remind everybody that the majority of those respondents, they did not want signs on Main Street, clearly. But in terms of these areas we're talking about, there was a significant majority that supported them. So I think we have to remember that.
Yeah, it was around I think it was about 2/3.
That's my recollection, Pete.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually think that signs along that section of 495 between Route 9 and the Mass Pike will get a lot of exposure, not just to Westborough, but Shrewsbury, Worcester commuters that take the Turnpike into Boston. I realize this, trend towards work from home, but that's a pretty major commuter route for this town, for towns to the west. So I feel like that those ads will serve Westborough Industries in attracting those commuters to local businesses and to local events and so on. So I'm not sure I agree with Hazel on that end of it, but okay, I think I've said enough. Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, one last thing is also with for safety, the Amber Alerts and messages like that will be posted. So I think having it on a main road is important. So I think there's real value for the community to make sure that we serve other towns, not just Westborough.
Yeah. Okay. So Jim Robbins, do you have any comments before we go to the public?
Well, just as an informational thing, it was discussed earlier about marijuana and adult entertainment. As you know, our current bylaws that we have governing those two uses do not allow any off-premises advertising of those two uses. If we had any of those uses on site, the only signage that they could have would be on-site advertising. And because of that, this bylaw is consistent with that. I'm sure that the Attorney General will remind the town that that could be challenged, but any zoning bylaw can be challenged. I feel that this language is consistent with the existing language that we have governing those two uses in town. And I'm sure we have Representative Clear Channel here this evening. He could verify that there are no adult uses or marijuana uses advertised on the Route 9 digital billboards.
Yeah, what about the billboard on 90? Because I'm pretty sure I saw a dispensary ad up there the other day.
I can't speak for that one.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's a good question. I can ask Fred about that. The only other thing I want to accomplish before we move on to another item is to hear Joe Jenkins's comments as representative from Clear Channel, as it was initially their proposal.
All right, Joe, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Joe Jenkins, on behalf of Clear Channel, and thank you for pushing us ahead on the agenda tonight. Very much appreciated. Clear Channel is happy with the current version, although I did suggest to Jim some minor changes today that I think are more in the way of clarifications. Jim, would you like me to speak about those?
Please, you're going to be more able to explain your intention than I can.
Okay, first, and Jim and I, we talked about this first one this afternoon. Mike Morella, are you on as well?
Yes.
Hi, Mike. And the first one, Jim, I know you spoke to Fred about it, and you said that you didn't think it really added anything. any clarification. I tend to agree with you on that. I think I spoke to Mike about it when I first saw this one. I'm fine if that is not added to this proposal.
Okay, thank you.
And the next one, I think is 3345, number 1. Is that the next one, Jim? The next change? Because I'm looking at a printed version.
The next one is 3343, number 9.
Oh, okay.
And Fred and I are okay with this. This is clarifying that the select board and the owner operator of the off-premises digital billboard would need to mutually agree on a schedule of advertisements that were public advertisements. That's only reasonable. The way I originally wrote it is I said that the selectmen shall determine the amount of advertising. And obviously it's not their billboard. It's a privately owned billboard. They need to be in a mutual agreement. So, and that would be something that would be subject of the developer agreement with the town anyway, that the selectmen have authority over. So I'm fine with that change.
Yeah, as Clear Channel's attorney, as the proponent, I think it's important to remember that this still has to go to the select board, and that's where the development agreement will be drawn, and many of the details that we think about that may not be in here would be incorporated into that development agreement.
Yeah, can I interject here, Joe? We've capitalized the term development agreement. Do we need to define that in some way? Because it seems to me that implies a level of understanding of development agreement that isn't necessarily.
It is defined,
clear.
Mr. Chairman, under section 3345.
Okay, let me go back and look at that then while you continue.
Okay, I think the next item, Jim, was 3345, number 1. And here, this is the other type of communication that the town or the state, county, theoretically, would like to have on the board would be emergency messages. So there's been originally it just said that the board's proposed draft mentioned that the select board would determine what messages, but we have to also keep in mind that the Mass Department of Transportation will require certain items to be posted on the digital billboard from time to time in emergency or communication situations. So Clear Channel has suggested this alternate language that I believe you should see, or at least Jim has, that would read: the select board recognizes that the Mass Department of Transportation regulations with a citation require the owner operator of a digital billboard to coordinate with all government authorities, including but not limited to the town, to display when appropriate emergency information important to the traveling public. And the owner operator of a digital billboard shall comply with its obligations and set forth in that same regulation and ensure that emergency measures remain in the advertising rotation according to applicable protocols.
I'm totally fine with that, Joe. I'm going to have to look at that a little closer tomorrow because that's different from the language you originally sent me.
Yeah, I sent this last one a little later. I think after we spoke, I think I struck one sentence, Jim, that we were worried about.
Okay.
All right, Joe, why don't we get together, get that language over to Jim, and then we can recirculate this to the board so we have a chance to see it as well, because we haven't seen that at all.
Okay, I sent it to Jim very late and I apologize.
No, that's fine. I think we're going to continue this anyway, because I want to make sure that the public has had a chance to speak, and given the technology issues at the beginning of the meeting, I hearing tonight, unless I'm outvoted on that. Joe, while you're at it though, you skipped over, I think you skipped over 3344, number 8, on the new technology.
Yeah, I was reading from the newest red line. It didn't have the old red lines in it, so I'm sorry. That's why I skipped. So,
and I had a question on this when you finish. So go ahead.
I think Mike Morello might be better to explain this. I just think what the Clear Channel is trying to say is that new technologies are developed, that as long as it complies with the light requirements and the other specifications in the bylaw, that it would be also usable for digital billboards. And that no new approvals would be required.
Yeah, so I'm assuming the building commissioner would have to approve a change from an old billboard to a new billboard. Am I, Fred, are you on? Can you tell me
I
if
don't
this
think Fred
language
is-
would?
I don't think
Okay.
Fred is here. He's at the select board meeting.
Oh, right, okay.
Um,
I mean, I would
Mark,
like at least the
no.
building commissioner to sign off on a change.
Yeah, Mark, I think that that's terribly important because we have no idea at this time what those changes could be. And, I think that, if all of a sudden they start using those, the headlights that are impossible to see back with, I mean, if you have things like that on there. So I think we've got to watch that because we've had some problems in town with signage with design review on this new kinds of technology. So I think it's very important that it is an open language where they can just go ahead and do this without. I'd like to see it come back to the planning board if it's going to be a.
Yeah, Mike Morello, you're on. Do you have to apply for a building permit when you put up a new digital billboard?
Yes, so for the initial installation, we have to apply for and receive a building permit. And then the technology these days for a digital screen, it lasts about 10 years and then it outlives its useful life. So when we want to replace that digital screen, just like other communities we're working with, we do have to apply for another building permit to put that new screen up. So the language in number 8, it really means if there are more efficient LED signs out there, because when they first came out, they used X amount of electricity. Now they've been out for 10 or 12 years. They use almost half the electricity they did back then. So all we wanted to have in there is we didn't have to come back and do a whole new ordinance change just to replace the digital screen that's more efficient.
Yeah, all right. I think my objection there is maybe the wording of it. I agree with the intent. I'm okay with the concept that, if you come up with new technology that's more efficient but still complies with the bylaw, then you should be able to use that. But I don't like the language that you suggested about not obtaining any additional approval. It makes it sound to me like somebody could argue that you don't need a building permit to put up a new sign in place of an old sign. And so maybe we could rework that wording, and Jim Robbins will you help them with that?
Yes, Fred and I met on this today and we talked about it. We preferred our original language. I, however, don't see that much of a difference between their proposal. We'll talk about it again. Joe and I can talk tomorrow.
Excellent.
All right. So Joe, you had already done 3345 number 1. You added a number 3 to that section. Such terms shall be memorialized in the development agreement. Jim Robbins, you had said there was a definition of a development agreement. Is that basically this whole section is the definition?
Yeah, so 3345, the first sentence, off-premises signs shall be permitted if the selectmen determine the billboard serves to provide a public benefit to the town of Westborough. So the development agreement makes that determination. And they already have a format that they follow because the 3 digital billboards that are on Route 9 as well as the one on the Mass Pike all have development agreements.
Point of information, if it says off premises shall be permitted, it determines that the billboard sign serves to provide a public benefit to the town of Westborough. All right, does advertising a restaurant in Marlborough provide a public benefit to the town of Westborough?
I think you could argue that it does if it's got good food, but that's just me. No, I mean, I get back to the public benefits of increased tax dollars, increased, fees, local fees that the selectmen will negotiate, and so I guess not every ad is going to benefit.
Not every ad. That's right.
But I wish this board would think a little bit outside the box and not just look at the money involved. I think we've got to look at the effect on the community as a whole.
I think we have, Hazel. I would dispute that.
I would also dispute that there are a number of public service benefits created by this signage. And, we have examples on Route 9 of it. I can appreciate that you may not prefer the signs, but the idea or the argument that they create, moral hazard and public hazard is just, I don't think true. And I think the revenue for the town, the additional tax revenue, and frankly, the rights of a property owner to maximize development of their space in a way that doesn't harm the town and generates benefits is something that I know I'm factoring when considering this. I think the restrictions we put on this in combination with the difficulty of citing this, I'm struggling sometimes to understand by positions on this board that the applicants and developers are creating structures in their own interest, So in other words, advertising needs to be viewed effectively by the north and southbound traffic. The Department of Transportation's involved as an additional check, but the citing of, an optimal location is going to reduce the number of even signs available. So the first movers will be rewarded by choosing sites, and also that's wetlands on both sides there. So both elevation and wetlands suggest to me that there's not going to be very many applicable locations where a company would invest in the capital cost to put a digital sign up in that location. So I'm very comfortable that the benefits outweigh the concessions that we make by allowing these.
Yeah, I guess I feel like one of the advantages that Westborough has is its location at the intersection of, 9, 495 and the Turnpike, and, to inhibit, a commercial landowner from putting these signs up and taking advantage of that location, unless you can demonstrate a tangible detriment, I just, I'm not sure I can see the negative to this. All right. Moving on. Any other public comments? Joe, are you all set? I think we went through all of your red line. Yeah, that was the last one, right?
Yeah, I'm all set. We're very happy to have this discussion this evening. Thank you.
All right. Any other public comments? Anything else? Rod Schaefer, you need to unmute. Yep.
Thank you, Mark. Rod Schaffert, 8 Parkman Street. I have to say I agree strongly with Hazel. I think the language written into our bylaws originally was there for a reason, and I don't see the great benefit of changing it without understanding the economic impact to the town of Westborough, which I don't know if it's been fully described, but I agree. The thought of having 3 billboards from Route 9 to Mass Pike in an area that doesn't have that type of thing just strikes me as wrong.
Yeah. So I actually checked with the Board of Assessors. I'm on the Board of Assessors. I checked with the town assessor on this. Off-premises digital billboard signs can currently generate in this town anywhere from $3,000 for the older version, non-digital, up to 26,000 a year in tax revenue, which would be the big sign on the Turnpike. That's based on income really from the sign. So each sign has a different income. So, each sign has a somewhat different tax obligation. In addition, each sign pays a fee that currently, I believe, goes into the Economic Development Committee's grant program for small businesses in town. I believe that grant program has been allocated 40,000 a year, and they were overwhelmed with applications to the point where they couldn't give everybody the money that they asked for. So
there's more demand for sure, Mark.
Yeah.
Four signs would be hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. It's not insignificant. Let's just be clear. It's not insignificant. That's a lot of grants between taxes and per side fees.
Yeah. So I'm not sure,
You just said you didn't want 4 signs. So, let's look at this logically.
I said I didn't want more than 4, Hazel. I didn't want 11. And I don't think there'll be 4, but my point is several signs would be 6 figures in revenue. It's not insignificant. That's a lot of economic development funds.
All right. So, Rod, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you short. I just wanted to give you some information on the financial benefits that we're considering on this. So if you want to continue, please.
No, that was one of my questions. And clearly, I'm all for raising taxes, and I'm a member of the Economic Development Group. So that
don't say you're all for raising taxes. You got to rephrase that. You're all for, you're all
not raising taxes, raising money to put towards taxes.
There you go.
Instead of taxes. How's that?
Raising revenues.
There you go. Wrong term. Sorry. I think the visual impact. I'm just not a Billboard fan, and to me they're a distraction. And I don't appreciate having to look at them. But I'm one person. I think it's appropriate that the town vote on it, and we see what the town wants.
Right. Yeah, I think it's important that we, give the town a chance to consider this. So in that sense, I'd like to see it move forward. All right. Any other public comments, Kristen? Any emails? All right. I don't see anything or hear.
Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, never mind. It was just something else. No emails yet.
All right. So I would like to continue this to next week's meeting so that we have a chance to rework some of the minor language, circulate a final draft, and then make a decision at next week's meeting. So if somebody wants to motion on that, or
I move that we continue the public hearing on, do you want it listed on this particular article until the 15th of February at 6:30?
I second that.
okay, I think I heard Pete second it. So we have a motion and a second on the continuance of the sign bylaw proposal to next week. We have to do a roll call vote. All those in favor of continuance: Hazel,
Yes, to continue.
Jim Ball,
Yes, to continue, Mark.
Tim Kaler,
Taylor, yes, to continue.
Pete Bouchard,
Yes, to continue.
and I vote yes as well to continue this to next week. Thank you all for coming in. You have a good night. You're welcome to stay. We have an exciting agenda in front of us. So, and
Thanks.
we're going to
Thank
move
you
on.
all.
All right. we're going to move on as quickly as possible to make up for some lost time at the beginning. The next item on the agenda is the Ieo Amendment, and I'm going to turn this over to Jim again to introduce this, take us through that, and then we'll have the same comment process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a similar situation where we had proposed an overlay district on the west side of town to be called Industrial E. We were pretty much tracking the language that we used on the east side of town for the Industrial D district. During the public hearing process at last town meeting, we determined that this was probably not ready to be voted on at town meeting. So we asked the town meeting voters to return the article to the planning board for further study, and that we would bring back another proposal after we put together what we thought was a better conceived bylaw. The zoning review committee, made up of myself, the zoning enforcement officers, also the building commissioner, Fred Leonardo, and chairman of the zoning board of appeals, Justin Lundberg, and planning board member Jim Ball, make up the zoning review committee. We looked at this. We looked at the Industrial D district. We, in consideration for the west side of town, noted that we needed to protect the residential neighborhood that surrounds this. So we created residential setbacks for any uses that might come out of the Industrial E overlay rather. We looked at properties which were most advantageous for future development. We looked at the height of structures, and we noted that on the Industrial E side of town, structures can be up to 6 stories tall. We didn't want to be that tall, so we're proposing 5 stories to protect our water supply on that side of town, rather than increasing the available coverage to 60% with a 40% open space requirement. We decided to be less aggressive and only allow 50% coverage, maintaining 50% open space. We also added low impact development and LEED certification for the buildings to this new bylaw. We wanted to protect the groundwater supply in that area. So we did, like I said, only allow 50% coverage. We also developed a requirement for electrical vehicle charging and a requirement for buildings and sites to be photovoltaic energy efficient, which is solar energy. Doesn't mean they would have to install solar energy, but their building would need to be ready to receive solar energy. Or a parking lot may have a solar canopy, or there may be a solar array at somewhere on the site to provide for solar compatibility. Those things said, I'll begin the PowerPoint presentation. Next slide. Thank you, Kristen. This is language that's right out of the bylaw, description of the area and the purpose of the bylaw. The Industrial E or IE overlay district would encompass properties on the west side of town along Otis Street, Secaucus Drive, Valenti Drive, and Smith Parkway as designated in the town zoning map. The area is currently highlighted by a series of industrial and commercial uses encompassed by the general industrial IB district. The purpose of this amendment is to create more opportunities for commercial uses in the long term, such as professional office, research and development, and technology uses. The Industrial E overlay district would allow increased land use intensity through increased dimensional standards, more permissive than that provided by the underlying IB district. Next. What's proposed? A new zoning overlay district called the Industrial E district. The uses would be allowed by right, the same as the current Industrial B. Allowing up to 5 stories by right. Currently 4 stories are allowed by right. Requiring a minimum of 50% open space. Currently 60% is required. Site plan review by the planning board would be required, the same as it is in the IB district currently. Next. Though uses in the IE overlay would be allowed to increase coverage and increase building height privileges, provisions are made to protect the environment and the surrounding neighborhood. Next. Project design must maximize opportunities for walking and bicycling, incorporate best practices in energy efficient design, environmental protection, stormwater management, LEED, which is lead in energy and environmental design, criteria for buildings, and low impact development techniques wherever practical. It must retain existing mature vegetation wherever possible, provide for winding of sidewalks and creative siting of structures, assure that landscape materials used as buffers are native, non-invasive, hardy for New England weather conditions and disease resistant. Next. Assure a mix of trees, shrubs, and perennials or annual flower beds are integrated as appropriate for the proposed use in the site. Provide for electric vehicle charging stations serving parking facilities for proposed projects shall be negotiated with the site plan authority. I put 10%. I want to rework that language. It might be 5%. I'd like the planning board to give me direction on that. I would streamline that language a little bit. Next, assure that the project site design provides for photovoltaic energy generation readiness. That's solar energy. If a property is in the IE district is within 300 feet of a residential use, any development of such IE parcel shall be required to screen its residential abutters from any lights or sound coming from the parcel proposing the new development. Such screening shall be achieved by eliminating lighting on the side of the proposed development that faces the residential use, adding landscaping, fencing, or other visual or sound buffer. Next. So this is our zoning map. We're talking about the west side of town only, and I'm going to show you a more specific map. Next. So this is the current industrial B district, that highlighted in purple. The properties that we propose to overlay in the upper left corner, Valenti Drive, known as Boston Hill, there's 3 parcels there. Then over to Otis Street, those parcels that directly abut Otis Street, from the Highway Business District all the way down to the railroad tracks, not as far down as Fisher Street, because there are residential properties along Fisher, only to the railroad tracks, as well as those properties on Secaucus Drive. There are 2 properties on Secaucus Drive and 1 property on Smith Parkway adjacent to the MBTA train station. That's currently used by Coughlin Electric, Columbia Tech. Now that property is an interesting property because it would be required to create the residential buffer to protect any properties on the other side of the railroad tracks within 300 feet. Next slide. So the article provides more opportunities to meet the desires of today's modern office and R&D companies. It improves Westborough's attractiveness when competing with other towns for businesses. Next. It helps boost the town's tax base and helps to reduce the burden on the residential taxpayer. I believe that's the last slide. Yes, thank you, Kristen.
Okay, so why don't we go through questions first? Thanks, Jim. Who wants to start? Comments?
I'll start, Mark.
Go ahead, Tim.
So I don't have questions. I'm going to make comments. I'm supportive of this for 5 reasons. The first is that the master plan clearly articulates kind of aspirations for sustainable development, which, you know, for citizens, that means high energy efficiency buildings built with recyclable materials and low environmental impact site design. That's what I understand the overlay IE to propose. And I would suggest that this overlay concept is one of the few mechanisms we have at this time to balance development, new development, with the environmental, open space, and climate interests expressed by citizens in the master plan. So that's the first kind of major argument. The second is this district creates an incentive for development of an energy efficient structure that I just described, low carbon footprint, low environmental impact. And since the relative capital cost to construct such a structure, you know, to meet a LEED standard, is going to be much greater than a structure just to IB zone by right rules. There needs to be some sort of market incentive to do that. And I think the concessions of density and height are, you know, appropriate, so that we need to make sure that the, if you will, the criteria for the development itself is ironclad and produces the kind of low carbon impact building that will again carry out a larger value and a larger attractive market position over its useful life. I would say the value of that commercial building built to a proposed IE standard is going to be greater than an equally sized structure that meets IB by right requirements and building codes, because these properties built to LEED standards can be expected to have a higher market value and lower vacancy rate over their life cycle. So this is going to generate greater relative tax revenue for the site for any one of the parcels based on the, you know, based on the value of an IE a building built to the IE standard. Obviously, just the net difference in size, if the development takes advantage of the additional 10% space, which one would be expected that they would, and an additional floor, you know, without being sustainable, that in and of itself is going to represent a higher market value and an overall value for tax purposes. So, and I guess the last point is that the low impact design required for the site in IE is going to afford better protection for groundwater and the natural environment in the overlay zone than, again, a comparably built building in the IB zone. So those are the major comments I would make about supporting this. Jim and I talked earlier today about a minor modification to 5952-2, which we don't need to look at right now. I'll wait for the rest of my colleagues to comment, but it would simply separate the expectation for a LEED certified structure or building and the language that supports low impact design, so which has to do more with the site itself. And you know, I've got some proposed language for that additional clause. So this would result in a net additional item in the language. And I should say that, you know, I've consulted with Pete Dunback, who's chair of Sustainable Westborough, in looking at this over the last few days. I have references to the town of Lexington that has similar language and the town of Newton. So I just want to express my support for this. I think that this is would be a terrific advantage of the town for generations, assuming that those parcels will be developed to IB at some point before the state building codes are revised such that this type of development will be required everywhere. This represents a way for us to add to the 2 commercial buildings that are built to LEED standards in the school we have, and then the other MGH building that's on the drawing board. I think it would be a tremendous asset for the commercial and industrial base, which we're all trying so hard to increase at this particular time, given the budget challenges. So it's for those reasons I'm supportive of this. Thanks, Mark.
Next. Okay. Who else would like to speak? Jim Ball, Jim.
Yeah,
Pete?
sorry, Mark, I was muted. Yeah, I mean, I would echo Tim's comments. Obviously, you know, again, from an economic development standpoint, trying to find the balance, recognizing that on this side of town with that it is near residential areas and all, we tried to find a balance between, the other side of town and that overlay versus this. And I think that's what we've worked to try to do. So my hope is people agree with that. We gave it a lot of thought. And indeed, this is what we came up with. So I obviously support it.
Mark, yeah, at this point I support it as well. We've really ironed this all out. I question why it was only 5 stories compared to 6, based on the residential, and I think five stories makes sense. I think we need to incentivize businesses come to our area. And we, even my wife today, she goes, "What were you voting on? The taxes went up." The taxes went up again, and so I think it's important that we really consider moving forward with this, just to help alleviate taxes in general. So I am for this.
Hazel, comments, anything?
Yeah, I really don't agree with this. And I think that a couple of things. I agree about the sustainability aspects. I think it's important in any new buildings that should be done. But I'm also concerned about the height on this. I would not really like to see it go from 4 to 5 stories. I think 4 stories is sufficient for that area. We're not trying to build another computer drive and over in that area. We're trying to keep this low impact, particularly because there are a lot of residential areas around there and people coming from those areas. This really should not look like computer drive as far as I'm concerned. I also am concerned about the use of Hakamuka Pond, which sits right in the middle there. I think this is going to have a negative effect on the use of that particular area, which because it's just starting to be developed at this point. I'd like to see that really have more development for residents to be able to use. And finally, I am really opposed to decreasing the amount of the amount of open space compared to the building space. I would like to see that remain at a 40-60 ratio. I think that it's important for the board not to just look at the dollars and cents. I keep making this argument, but look at the character of our community. And I think if we want 5 stories, 6 stories, large office buildings, they should remain on the east side of town where we already have that kind of development. And this should be more of a low impact site side of town if we're going to promote development there.
Okay, thanks, Hazel. So last week I introduced a couple of concepts to this that I was hoping we could address in the bylaw, and we talked a little bit about maybe addressing them in site plan regulations instead. And town council has said that we probably can't do that. Well, we have to at least put something into the bylaw to address that if we want to, and I do. So I started thinking about the open space and the traffic and what what I would hope to accomplish. And I think that there's a couple of ways we could approach this, and I'm just going to use a scenario of a 10-acre site because it's easier math. Normally on a 10-acre site, you would have 4 acres eligible for development and 6 acres open. This would provide 5 acres for development. So my thoughts were that, in order to maintain the 40%, that development would need to obtain conservation or open space restrictions on 2.5 acres somewhere else in town. It wouldn't have to be on that site. That would maintain the 40%, but still allow them to do greater lot coverage in that location. And I thought that might be a way to offset the open space impacts that this bylaw suggests. The other option would be having them, just purchase the acre that they're covering. If they're going from 4 acres to 5 acres, they would purchase 1 acre somewhere else. That wouldn't maintain the 40% ratio, but it would replace the land that they were not keeping open. And then possibly putting a provision in that the planning board could waive that requirement if the developer chose to make a contribution to the open space fund to give some flexibility in case there isn't an actual piece of property they could buy, because you can't make somebody sell to you if you don't want to. I guess you could offer more than market value, but I don't think that's fair to a developer to be in a position where they have to at the mercy of someone else to comply with that. So again, I'm trying to formulate this concept on the fly a little bit, and I don't necessarily expect to complete that tonight, but I'm hoping to get some feedback from you as to whether I should even pursue this. I'd like to introduce some language into the bylaw to affect that change. As far as the traffic goes, I think we would have to address it we'd have to address it in a manner that was suggested by council, which was really kind of a vague. The planning board will be able to determine infrastructure needs after hiring a consultant, and I thought that was a creative and kind of broad way of giving us the authority to ask for money towards traffic improvements in the area, or sidewalk improvements, pedestrian improvements. So that may be language we could introduce to this as well.
Mark, are you advocating then that this remains as a special permit?
No, I mean, I like the idea of by right. I think the problem, even with a special permit, is you get into negotiations, and I don't think the planning board is really in a great position to negotiate. I've seen that several times where we just get squeezed, and it's really difficult for us to get any concessions out of it. I just want to spell out what our expectations are from a developer and have that be clear so that they know what to expect when they get into a by right site plan review. And I think if they, again, my point on this is that it's an overlay and they are getting relaxed zoning standards. And as much as I appreciate the sustainable requirements in this bylaw, I get back to my point that benefits the developer as much as anyone. That yes, it may cost more, but it will save them money in using that building. And as Tim pointed out, it will result in a more valuable building. So I personally think that is not necessarily a onerous requirement on a developer. But I do think that, they're, by exercising this overlay, they're asking the town to reduce open space. And I think it's reasonable to ask them to make up for that somewhere else, whether it be to buy enough land somewhere else in town to offset the ratio and leave it at 40%. Just allow them to replace the 10%. Again, the math gets a little complicated because you really need to get 2.5 acres for every acre that you cover. But that would still maintain the 40 to 60 ratio. So I'm not sure how the board feels about that, and I'd like to explore that if you guys want to do that. So, thoughts?
Mark,
Yes.
who was talking?
Jim, you.
Okay. I'm open to the idea. I think the key is, like we've talked before, if you're going to do it, it's got to be very specific. So you could say, I mean, you talked before about some of the towns that are doing, it was somewhere up in the North Shore, I forget where you said, that had a development fee. You know, it is what it is. If you know, 1% of your construction cost goes to an infrastructure fund for the town, or some percentage, or it's exactly what you're saying. You have to replace the equivalent amount of land with open space elsewhere. It has, you know, unlike when we've been in these situations trying to negotiate where there's no clear rules, and it's a very challenging position. And we have some folks that are very generous and others that aren't at all. It's a very different. I think if you're going to do it, I could be convinced. I want to caution you when you say they have a more valuable building, so it's in their interest, but it costs them a lot more to build it, and they're going to have greater property taxes forever as a result, and they don't get any more use out of it. So it really isn't to their benefit.
Yeah,
Okay.
but their heating and
I agree.
a lot
I
of their
totally agree
costs
with
go
that.
down in the long run. They might
I
make
do agree
back
with that.
the.
So there is that benefit. I agree. But my point is if you're going to do this, and I could be convinced, it's got to be extremely specific, not arbitrary. Otherwise, I think it blows the whole thing up.
Right, and I agree with that, but I do think we need to include some type of waiver authority so that the board has some discretion about whether it would be in the best interest to move the project forward.
Without it,
if a developer, you know, in my scenario, if a developer only was able to acquire 2 acres instead of 2.5, really going to hold up a development over that 1/2 acre. I'm not sure that's what I'm trying to accomplish with that. Or we could just say, you know, look, instead of buying 2.5 acres, make a contribution to the open space fund, but at least it gives the town and the planning board a position from which to negotiate and say, look, you know, this is what you need to do.
so if you're going to do that, again, it's got to be formula driven. It can't
Right.
be make it. Okay, we'll give you $1,000 to the open space fund. It has to
No.
be formula driven. So again,
No,
it may
I agree with it.
Or
Yep.
you contribute 1/2 of 1% of your construction cost to the open space fund. You know, I'd have to think about those numbers to see what might be equivalent. Obviously, depends on the size of the building and all those things, but that's the only way it works, is if the alternative is very specific in a formula that's clear.
No, I 100% agree with that. If we were asking for a contribution to the open space fund, it would have to be formula driven, probably based on what the cost would be to acquire the open space somewhere else.
Yeah, I honestly think if you would go with this approach, there needs to be one method of, countering it. I don't think one project should buy space and another one should donate. It has to be one standard process. I think maybe the donation to a fund and having a certain calculation that's straightforward, that is for every project. I think that makes sense to me. I don't think we can do multiple I think it has to be straightforward, or else we're going to get into the weeds in this every single time this comes up.
I think that's a good point, Pete.
And to be clear,
So-
Mark, they could always opt to the underlying zoning. If a buyer doesn't need the extra space or the height, they can opt to the existing, and they don't have to use the overlay, correct?
Right.
Which then wouldn't require a contribution.
Right.
Okay.
Tim
May I
Kaler, you had your
comment,
hand up.
Please,
Yeah.
yeah, I've had my hand up.
Yep.
So I'm supportive of exploring an impact fee for, that provides the town one-time compensation for new development. I think the attorney in their comments repeated a phrase over and over again, that there must be a demonstrated nexus and rough proportionality between the required mitigation payment and the adverse impact to the community from the applicant's proposal. So I think we need to explore how to do that. I'm not in favor of applying it unilaterally to the IE overlay zone for 3 reasons. The first is that the merits of the proposed law change to establish this district are sufficient to approve. To Hazel's point, it isn't all about the money. And I guess I haven't done a sufficient job educating you that environmental and sustainability aspects of what we end up with, especially because of Hakamoku Pond, and the low impact site development issues to protect our groundwater. In industrial B, a developer can go in and just develop, and meet the current IB rules. This produces a premium development for decades to come and protects our environment. It's one of the few ways we have to do that. So the concessions we make with density and elevation relief are, significantly outweighed by the benefits to the town of just the structure alone. Then you look at the economics. So back to money, and any kind of impact fee is going to diminish any owner's incentive to invest in a LEED's low impact building. It's substantial additional capital cost to do this, and they're putting that money at risk on behalf of our town, as compared with the building they have by right ability to create. So, and the other 2 things is it discriminates against this overlay zone as compared to at least the ID zone on the other side, where additional traffic and open space are impacted by new development as well. So I'm in favor of having the board explore it and create one, but I would want it applied equally to both overlay zones and consider expanding to it all, commercial and residential development. I don't understand why we would single out, this particular overlay for that fee and not apply it more widely, because the town is impacted by all development. And lastly, it's going to require that we pass this article over. I don't see any way, Mark, even if we were all supportive to, it's not structured in this bylaw right now. And it has to be, by the way I read the attorney's comments. We can't step aside that. I just don't think we have the runway to, create language that would be acceptable, not acceptable, frankly, even feasible at this point. I don't know what we're voting on, and I would be against anything that wasn't, as Jim said, something the developer could anticipate, because it's just another, it's a one-time tax or fee. They'll accept it if they can know it's predictable and have it established. But I really don't want to pass this over yet again for this issue. I'd rather vote it up and down and go at it that way. Our emphasis here should, according to the law, we should be trying to expedite commercial development as much as possible to get these on the tax rolls. And I've already gone over all the reasons why the tax revenue that's generated for this produces a much better structure and property for us, and it generates marginally much higher taxes for us over its life cycle. So I don't know how that's missed. I proposed strengthening the language around the LEED certification required and making sure that, again, that the requirements for this concession are ironclad in terms of what we will get in terms of a facility. And there even needs to be more, examination of that by all of you. What level of LEED's qualification it should meet. And but I'm not in favor of delaying this overlay at this time. I am in favor of exploring the impact fee you described to incorporate in our zoning, independent of how we rule on this overlay. So I think it's something we need to find a mechanism to do in a predictable way. That's my 2 cents or more.
Mark, if I may follow up.
Yeah, Jim Ball, go ahead.
I would simply say listening to Tim's argument is very persuasive to me in terms of it's a different, open space has its own community benefit, right? But I agree strongly and listen to his argument again that essentially the incentive here is to create a much more high quality building for the climate. And that is another way to benefit the community that's lasting and important. And I kind of, and I actually like I was intrigued when you brought up the impact fee last time, because I think I talked, Steve Durant just some time ago about, hey, remember all this stuff brings other needs. I like the idea, frankly, of leaving this as it is, and the impact fee is something we have to consider for all development everywhere, to be able to help us with future fire stations and future everything else that we need. So after listening to Tim speak, I back up my prior comments a bit, in that I appreciate what you said, Mark, but I would argue that added expense to create these high quality buildings that have less of an impact on our community is the incentive, or is what we get from them in return for this extra use of the land. I'm after listening to Tim, that's my feeling.
Okay. Any other comments?
I don't know. I'd like to see Mark's ideas looked into more. I think if we pass this and then go back and try to look at mitigation and how that's going to work, I think we're going to find ourselves in a real conundrum of how we're going to deal with this. So I think when changing something like this, at the same time, if we want to look at a mitigation strategy, I think we need to tie these things together. So I'd be much more comfortable. What is the hurry in doing this? I guess is my other thing, is that I don't see why we can't do a little more work on this and make it the way it really should be than to just go ahead and pass this. This could wait till October. I don't see any great push, as far as I can see, to pass this particular time.
Okay, any other comments? You guys have given me a lot to think about. I'm kind of questioning what the hurry is as well. I know we don't want to pass it over again, but if we bring it forward an article and it's defeated, we may not be able to bring back an article again for a while. Jim, can you answer what that time frame would be? If we vary it slightly, can we bring it back, or how does that work? Jim Robbins.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question and a good item to point out. So if the planning board supports an article, if we are the sponsor of an article and the board votes to support the article as written and it fails at town meeting, it cannot come back for 2 years. It could come back in another form, it would have to be significant. I mean, you couldn't take one section out and say, okay, it's different. It would have to be significantly different. I'd ask town council to tell me what that means. Does it mean fewer parcels in the overlay? Does it mean no mitigation? Does it mean you have to totally rework that section? I don't know what it means, but I also have a question for the board. But what I'm telling you is that if the board sponsors an article and it fails, it can't come back for 2 years. Does that answer your question?
Right.
Now,
So go ahead, Jim Robbins. Finish.
So,
I'm sorry.
Listening to this discussion and writing things down, trying to keep up, it sounds to me like we've come full circle on this. One option is to propose the article as it's written at town meeting and get that to pass, and then amend it at a future town meeting to include mitigation, and have that mitigation be for all projects across all commercial and industrial zoning districts. Or it sounds like not do anything, but advise the town meeting that you've come up with a draft, but you feel like it's not where it's at, and explain why, and then not propose anything. So, I mean, you have a couple different options here. You could go with what's written and then change that, amend that yet further at a later date, or just not present anything.
I think one of the things we ought to think about is the fact that when we talk about mitigation, I think we need to look at it as to where these I find Computer Drive and the east side of town, the development there, very different from what the development should be over on Otis Street. Therefore, I think the mitigation should be different. So when you talk about it, I think we have to look at this as different parts of town as to what the mitigation might be, depending on what the impact of development is in that particular part of town. So for example, putting up a 5 or 6 story building over on Computer Drive is not going to have the same effect on the rest of the town that putting up a 5-story building over on Otis Street and that area is. So, I think that you can't blanketly look at mitigation for all new development. I think at the same time, we also talked at some point about doing some mitigation as far as residential developments go. But each of those are different things and they should be treated differently, I think. And therefore, I would prefer to take this as a I don't know, sort of not a practice, but looking at this as the whole thing together, where you're looking at the development, plus you're looking at possible mitigation based on where the development is and the kinds of things that are being done on that side of town versus what's being done on the east side of town. So that's my feeling. I'd like to see us do this right and not, come forward with something which we then decide we have to fix later.
Yeah. So I'm kind of in agreement with that. I get back to the attorney's comments that, mitigation needs to have a nexus and a rough proportionality. And I would argue that addressing open space, whether it be by acquisition of more open space somewhere else, and addressing the impact of traffic due to a larger development is more proportional and has a greater nexus than I'm struggling to understand the nexus between LEED certification or sustainable building practices and reducing open space and increased building height. I can see a loose connection there, and Tim alluded to it earlier, but it seems to be less.
Yeah, in fairness, there is no benefit being offered in the attorney's language when he writes rough proportionality between required mitigation payment and the adverse impact to the community from the applicant's proposal. So even by the comments of board members here, the notion of building to these higher environmental standards, which are substantive, they're not subjective. LEED certification is not subjective. The protection of our groundwater and site management and the materials used are laid out there. We'll have ample opportunity to review any project and ensure they comply. But in this discussion, the benefits of that building, not the tax revenue, just the benefits of that structure and that site in that particular zone over its life cycle is not being given any economic value at all. So that would only diminish the impact, the mitigation fee. So if you take building A on Secaucus Drive on a parcel built with a 40-60 split of 4 stories or 3 stories, is it 4? Whatever.
Yep.
Okay. And, with no special attention to the site, nothing related to LEEDs, and energy efficiency, recyclable materials used in construction techniques, protection of the site. If none of that happens, then there is no value to the town. So, we're not providing any offset to mitigation payment for building these structures. And I don't know what people thought they were getting in the master plan, but this is what sustainability is when it's operationally executed. That's what this building is.
Right,
it's not trivial. It's not
Tim,
trivial. I can't tell you what its economic value is, but it's not nothing.
Yeah, Tim, I don't think it's trivial at all. But I would argue that the master plan would encourage us, or, you know, to consider sustainable building practices in all developments, not just in overlays.
Totally. The
Okay.
same as mitigation, the same as we're saying mitigation should
But
impact all development. Why are we singling out this particular overlay at this
so
time?
Tim, let me finish my thoughts. So, but what we're proposing is basically saying that the mitigation, if you will, for this overlay is a lead, you know, is a sustainable building, right? That's the only real.
No, we're not saying that, because you're saying we need to compensate for the open space concession and for the height restriction.
No, the way it's written now, there is no compensation for the open space. And
This whole discussion is about proposing adding one to this overlay, isn't it?
Right. And I would say that the nexus between what's proposed in the overlay, which is reducing open space and increased building height, that nexus has a greater correlation to mitigation towards open space and mitigation towards traffic infrastructure than the nexus that you suggest towards.
No, I'm in agreement with you, though.
Okay.
I'm in agreement, but we don't have any of that mechanism worked out.
Right.
And we don't have any downstream means we have no downstream means of targeting open space in that district, in that area.
Right.
Nor do we have any.
My point is though, that I don't suggest that we have an open space contribution on every single development in town. I'm only suggesting that we ask for this open space mitigation in order to exercise an overlay, right? I mean, to me,
I understand that's what you're saying, but the 40% of the developable space that goes to a structure is gone forever. So it doesn't matter. You're arguing that the compensation is only for the marginal difference between 40 and 50%. And the traffic.
But are you then going to tell a single family landowner that, you know, I want to build a new house on my lot, so I'm taking away open space, so I have to pay something to the open space?
I didn't say that, Mark. You're the one proposing mitigation.
But that's why I'm saying it's not something we can put on every, and just unilaterally say that every proposal that comes forward is going to have to pay this mitigation. What I'm suggesting is that in order to exercise the overlay, what the lead
industrial
sustainable building practices is something I think
Mark, does the industrial D zone provide increased density and relaxed elevation?
Yes.
Is there a mitigation fee for that delta between industrial B development and the overlay?
No, there isn't.
Okay. That's all I'm saying, is that we should apply it equally, that there's no reason to penalize this particular overlay, that we should work out the mechanism, that we should have a schedule or a way of determining it that is not east side, west side. It's proportionate to the actual impact of whatever that is. And then we work that out. The time doesn't exist to work that out for this. So we pass this article over. If we pass this over again, then we pass it over and we incorporate a financial impact fee. But I would propose in the fall town meeting to then amend the industrial D district to include whatever mechanism that is.
Okay, I think we're in agreement now, Tim. Because I just not sure I'm ready to move forward a bylaw.
I would like to move to have a vote on this amendment on an as-is basis by the board, and about whether we bring it to town meeting as is.
Well, I think we need to finish the public hearing before we vote.
No, but I'm saying in terms of process, if we're going to move to pass it over, I want to make sure that we're all on record as supporting passing it over in its existing form.
And we'll get to that, but it's too early in this process.
I understand.
We have to finish the public hearing.
Okay.
Okay. You know, we may hear from someone in the public, or there may be other information that we should discuss before we make a decision on this. So I don't think we can take a vote on this now, but I do agree that we should make a motion at some point once the public hearing is completed. All right, I have a lot to think about. What else from the board before we move? I want to hear from Jim Robbins and then to the public. Anybody else have comments?
Yeah, I'd like to, I know there's a supposed committee that's supposed to be working on reuse of Hockomock. And I also wonder whether anybody's had any discussions with the Westchester Land Trust concerning this.
The Westborough Community Land Trust?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know that they've been consulted. We can ask them for comments, and I can bring this up at the Hockomock meeting. It's not on the agenda for tomorrow night's meeting, but I'll ask the chair if I can just make an announcement about it, and then we can discuss it at our next meeting, and which is in March, before town meeting, and the Hockomock committee can choose to support or not, depending on what we resolved in our process. Is that fair, Hazel? So Jim Robbins.
No, that's fine. I just, as I said, I do think that there may be some environmental concerns. And I think since the town has specifically set up this Hockomock study committee then, and that it's right in
Sure.
the center of where we're talking about this whole change, I think it's important that there be some input from various people like that.
Sure. Jim Robbins, can you make a note to reach out to Land Trust? We can ask them for comments. And
Comments on the bylaw as currently constituted?
Right.
I'll reach to Don Byrne.
Yeah, I'm not sure who's president now. I think it might be Jillian Beamer. Anyway, we'll reach out to Land Trust.
Yeah, I think Andy Collinsberg is someone also that probably be a good person to get some feedback from.
Well, Andy's on the Hockomock. Oh, I'm sorry, Andy's not on Hockomock. He's on so many committees, but he's not on that one. All right, we'll get commentary from Hockomock and from Land Trust if they're willing to provide it. All right.
So, Mark, you're going to reach to the Hockomock group?
Yeah, I'll ask if I can make an announcement tomorrow at our meeting. Not have a discussion, just make an announcement, and then see if we can get it on there.
If I don't get comments by the 22nd, I need to have, the selectmen are going to set the warrant, so we need to be able to advise them by our next meeting what we're doing.
Right. Okay.
I mean, at this point, quite frankly, I'm in favor of passing over it. I mean, I don't think there's no reason. I don't care if you pass over something 10 times. I think it's important to bring it to the town in the form in which we wish to see it passed.
Okay. All right. So this is a public hearing. If everybody is on the board has had a chance to comment. So I'd just like to hear if there's anybody from the public that wishes to speak. Any comments from the public via email, Kristen?
I don't have anything via email.
Well, I think that wraps up this discussion for tonight. So I'm going to make a motion to continue the public hearing on the IE Industrial E overlay to February 15th at 6:30.
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion of the motion? All those in favor, we'll do a roll call vote. Tim Kaler?
Yes, to defer.
To continue?
To continue, excuse me.
Okay. Sorry, I don't want to put.
Right.
Hazel, nurse?
Just to continue.
Jim Ball?
Yes, Mark.
Pete?
Yes.
Okay, and I vote yes as well. We'll continue this to next week at 6:30. All right, the last public hearing we have is on the M1 zoning. Again, Jim Robbins, I'll ask you to introduce this. I think this one's relatively simple, but I hope it is.
Thank you. So this zoning article is new. This is not one that was referred back to the planning board. And this came up as Fred and I were looking at our zoning bylaws, and the request came from the Recreation Department that they wish to build a basketball court on town property. And so the basketball court was determined to not be a structure, so it wouldn't need dimensional requirements to be set at town meeting. However, the use itself had to be permitted on town property, which is an M1 district. And when we looked at the zoning bylaw, we saw that outdoor recreational uses not associated with an educational use were not allowed in an M1 district. So we don't know what the purpose of that was when that was created, but we did some research and found that this goes all the way back to the 1970s. So we propose to amend that to allow recreational uses, if it's supported by the town, to be allowed on town property. We also found, while looking at open uses, that cemeteries were not allowed in the M1 or the M district, which is state or MDC property. So we thought that should be amended while we're looking at open uses. So we would change both of those uses to by right and make them a yes under the section 2300 use category. Could you show me the next slide, Kristen? So section 2300, which is our use regulation schedule in the zoning bylaw for open uses, you'll see under cemeteries, which is the fourth line down, the column for M and M1 currently says no, which would mean they would not be permitted. So we propose to change that to yes for both uses in both districts. And for outdoor recreation, 2 lines down further, operated by a governmental agency, we would change that from a no to a yes in the M and the M1 district.
Jim, is not the recreation department is not continued as looked on as a governmental agency or part of?
They are looked at as a governmental agency. And if you see the line that says outdoor recreation, other than the above, operated by a governmental agency. So the Dover Amendment, which is a court case, gave educational uses the right to operate in any district. But this is not an educational use. So for example, you probably think we got baseball fields, soccer fields all over town. They're generally associated with one of the schools or an educational use. But this would be operated on town property that's not associated with a school.
As I said, I'm not opposed to it. I just wondered why we were having to do this, but that's
yeah,
okay.
Me too. I'm
So-
surprised that this wasn't fixed years ago.
So Jim, basically under this, the way this is written now, Rogers Field, baseball fields up there, the fields, Haskell Playground, I mean, that's outdoor recreation, there's tennis courts.
That's right.
I mean, none of those would be, even the pickleball that was just approved
Yeah,
would
that's
not
right.
be allowed. So I just can't understand, I can't understand not supporting this, but any other thoughts? And as far as the cemetery thing goes, the town bought land to build a cemetery. That expense was authorized, I believe, at town meeting. I'm not sure that the town, wants to reverse that or waste that purchase. All right. Any other comments? I don't hear anything from the public on this one.
And Mark, let me just ask one absolute sort of a question. I mean, the new cemetery is proposed. It's in a residential area, but it was municipally owned land, I believe, owned by the town, was it not?
Right.
Yes.
So I can't think of the necessity of this particular change in the fact that I don't think there's any more land in the entire town owned by the town, which would be used for a cemetery.
Yeah, but Hazel, what you don't understand it, right? Even though that's even though the cemetery that is down on West Main Street, or it's not West Main Street, I'm sorry, it's North Street, right?
Right,
That is in a residential zone, except for the town-owned land, which is in M1 zone.
right.
So the
Okay.
cemetery itself is actually in M1 zone.
Oh, okay, I
under-
didn't
and-
realize that.
Yeah,
Okay.
any town-owned land is M1.
Okay, that's fine
As
then.
soon as the town acquires it, it becomes
So in
M1.
other words, the town did it and they weren't authorized, is what we're finding. So we're now changing that.
Yeah.
That's
I'm
fine.
actually not sure. Is that true, Jim, that as soon as the town acquires it, it becomes N1, or do we have to?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
And I mean, at some point prior to zoning, I'm sure that the Pine Street Cemetery and the South Street Cemetery were constructed prior to zoning, but technically they're non-conforming as well right now.
so I think that's an important change. If we're going to use that land as a cemetery on Nurse Street, we have to make this change. So, any other comments, questions? Anything from the public? No.
No emails.
All right.
I can say that taking out the pickleball courts would be very unpopular with some people I know.
Yeah. Jim, we have a draft motion on this, or do we want to?
So I didn't draft motions because I didn't know anyone was going to do it. I suspected things would be continued, but for this, it's very simple. A motion.
You know what, Jim, I'm sorry to cut you off. Because of the problems we had at the beginning of the meeting, I would like to continue this just in case somebody wants to make a public comment at the next meeting. I'm not sure. I just felt like that.
Good point.
Yeah, there might be somebody who feels like they didn't get the chance to speak tonight because of the way that the Zoom meeting started. So why don't we continue? I'll make a motion to continue the public hearing on the M1 zoning to February 15th at 6:30.
I second that.
All right. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor, we'll do a roll call. Pete?
Yes, Mark.
Jim?
Yes.
Yes. Oh,
All right, Tim?
yes.
Sorry. Hazel?
Yes,
And I vote yes as well. That's 5-0 to continue to next week. All right. Let's see what else is on the agenda. The master plan implementation. Jim Robbins, I'll let you introduce this again. I think we want to talk about Donnie's email, but I'll let you just open the
Sure.
discussion.
Thank you. I don't know if Kristen has the email, if she could bring it up. If you don't, you probably have all seen it. Donnie very graciously was able to get a memo to us that explained 3 options for the board to choose from. I think there are 3 good options. 1 and 2 are very similar, except for the number of meetings and the amount of staff time dedicated. Also, task 1 provides a written report that's in the context of the master plan, whereas option 2, though it contains the same tasks, does not provide that written report. And option 3, if you can scroll down there a little bit, Kristen, does not provide a certain number of meetings you're paying on a meeting by meeting hourly basis. The options provide costs. Option 3 that we just talked about is $1,500 on a meeting by meeting basis. Option 2, which has less of a staff dedication and fewer number of meetings, is $9,800. And option 3, which is the more comprehensive task for the town, and I think, and in my opinion, the most beneficial, is $15,600. I have spoken with the town manager about these 3 options, and she said if we go with either option 1 or 2, we need to have a town meeting article. I have asked her to save a spot on the warrant for option 1 or option 2, depending on what you decide to do. I would recommend that we go with the first option because it provides more staff, 2 dedicated staff. It provides more meetings, and it provides a written recommendation as to how the implementation fits with the master plan.
Okay, comments from the board.
I agree that option one makes the most sense. I don't want to just spend another $5,000, but considering the amount of time and effort that's gone into it and money already, I think for that difference to really get it put to work properly is the right way to go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead, Hazel.
I agree fully. I mean, I think that, in the scheme of things, the important thing for us to do is to move this master plan along. And this is certainly the most efficient and best way to do it. And I think we can make a good argument to the town that this is going to be money well worth spent, since we already have gotten a master plan and we're beginning to work with it. So I would put a warrant article asking for the funds to do option number one.
Yeah, I agree with Hazel. I think if we're thinking about the next 25 years for the town, I think talking $5,000 difference between these options, we need to be, I think, getting the right help and guidance so we actually implement the plan that the town wants, I think is important. So I think not skipping out on $5,000 and get as much help so we're moving in the right direction, it makes sense. And then the third option just doesn't seem reasonable, going meeting by meeting. It just seems like we'll end up wasting a bunch of money that way.
Tim, any comments?
No, I'm supportive of option one.
Yeah, I'm also supportive of option one. I think given that the master plan took, due to COVID, took a lot longer than any of us would have liked, I think it's important for us to have some coordination on the implementation efforts and hopefully, start the implementation process much more quickly than the master plan went. I mean, it was just a little bit frustrating with COVID. So I would support option one. And I think, do we need a vote on this, Jim? Jim Robbins, you're muted. Jim Robbins, you're muted. Jim Robbins, you're muted. Can you unmute? No. I guess he's having trouble unmuting. Well, I will make a motion then to request the town manager, or to the town planner and town manager, to put a warrant saying $15,600 be appropriated for the purposes of a consultant to help us with master plan implementation.
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion of the motion? All those in favor? Pete Bouchard,
Yes, Mark.
Jim Ball,
Yes, Mark.
Hazel Nurse,
Yes.
Tim Kaler.
Yes, Mark.
Okay, and I vote yes as well. That's 5-0 in support of another warrant article. Great. What else on the agenda? Oh,
Sorry, I
hey,
just was able to unmute. I got stuck there. Sorry about that.
that's all right.
You did good. You didn't need me.
Okay, well, we always need you, Jim. So what else is on the agenda? Kristen, what am I missing? Minutes? Okay.
Mark, did you want me to do the?
Yeah, I'm
the
sorry,
last
Jim.
meeting?
Paul, go ahead. I thought
Yep.
you were going.
Yeah, okay. So we had minutes that we received from Kristen from our last meeting on February 1st. Any comments or questions on those minutes? Which I would echo Hazel's comments that they were expeditiously done and done well.
Thanks, Kristen. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of February 1st.
I'll second that, Mark.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor, Jim Ball,
Yes.
Hazel Nurse?
I think I have to abstain, don't I?
No, I think you can approve the minutes.
Okay, I read them, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I approve.
Just because you weren't here, I mean, doesn't mean you don't approve of them. So,
No.
Pete,
Yes, Mark.
Tim Kaler,
Yes, Mark.
and I vote yes as well. That's 5-0 to approve those minutes. I need to apologize. I didn't read the agenda carefully enough, and we do not have the town planner authority discussion on the agenda tonight. So we will take that up again next week, and hopefully finalize that discussion. Any other business? Jim Robbins, I think you're saying something, but you're muted again. Give me a yes, there's more business, or a no, there's shake.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I have no additional business. My apologies to the board for not getting the discussion about the town planner reporting authority. It's been on the agenda for the last couple months. Apologies for having it drop off. It'll be on the agenda at your next meeting. I would just remind the board that we do need to move on these 3 zoning articles. And I will speak with Christy tomorrow about our discussion, particularly on the industrial E-district and how we might be leaning, what the options might be. Also, I think I will send the board draft motions. We will make edits to the digital billboard article and send it around to all the board to view. As soon as I get with Joe Jenkins tomorrow, I'll get those out to you probably by Thursday morning, and so that you have those. Your motions for all 3 of these articles will be to approve the article as written in the warrant. That is, unless you drop the IE article. And the reason that I say that is because all changes will be given to you, and the changes will be given to Christie to adjust in the warrant. My intention is to have no amendments on the floor. So you will have a final draft that will be transferred to the warrant. So there'll be consistency between what you vote and what's in the warrant. So your motion would be to approve the articles written in the warrant.
So I have a question for Jim. When and how will we address the proposed change that I made for the IE clauses?
I'll make the
Not
changing a
discussed.
new draft. You'll get a new draft.
Okay. So you
Before
found
the
what I
next meeting, so
emailed
you-
acceptable?
Well, let's discuss it tomorrow. I want to go over it with you just to make sure before I make those changes and send it to everybody.
Okay.
Thanks.
And what you're saying too, just with regard to timeline overall, is I believe the select board meets on the 22nd. So doesn't this need, we
Yeah,
vote
we
these up
need-
or down
yeah.
next week, or that's it?
Correct.
Well, it's not it, but it would mean that we would have to change the language on town meeting floor.
Right.
Right.
Which there's-
So if we don't get the language finalized by the 22nd, then we would have to change the language on town meeting floor. So we would put a motion up that would vary slightly from what was printed in the warrant.
Yeah.
And that's been done before, but what Jim is hoping to do is get that final draft to them before the 22nd, or the final version of the motions to them before the 22nd, so that we don't have to make any changes on town meeting floor.
Are you submitting language, Mark, to consider for impact fees to the IE language? Before
Yeah,
next week?
I'm thinking that that issue is going to be too complex. You made a comment about the runway is too short. I think that's true. We need to either move this forward or not. And if we decide not to move it forward, then I agree with you. It should be, those type of fees should at least be done in both overlays. And we should probably send that whole issue back to the zoning subcommittee and ask them to formulate something. And I'd be happy to work with them on that. But I think it's a pretty complex issue that I'm not sure we're going to iron out all the wrinkles by the 22nd, let alone by town meeting.
Yeah, I didn't think so. That's, sort of the logic. So it cleans it up for next week. Then we'll either pass it over again or defer
Well,
it.
we won't do anything other than make a recommendation. So,
Okay.
if it gets on, if the
Select board.
selectmen put it on the warrant, they put it on the warrant, but, we would
Our
not
vote
do
will
any-
be based on the existing language or whatever the language is next week.
Right,
That's what we'll be offering
Exactly.
recommendation on. Good.
okay.
Okay.
All right, no other business? I will make a motion then to adjourn.
Second,
Hazel seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Tim Kaler,
Yes.
Pete Bouchard?
Yes.
Jim Ball,
Yes, Mark.
Hazel Nurse,
yes.
and I vote yes as well. That's 5-0 to adjourn. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mark.
Good night.
Hey, Kristen, before you go, can we explore a way to require, for you to give approval to people coming in or some type of
Yeah.
screening?
Well,
But I don't know Zoom well enough. Yeah.
I think maybe a webinar would be best for public hearing situations. That would allow people access. The problem is we have to post those links and give them to people ahead of time, instead of just one-off giving it to them, the same day kind of thing. A webinar would keep all of the participants separate, so the only people that would show up on the screen would be you guys. And then